Good. So, good morning. Good morning. Um, let's have a look. So we're gonna do the acupuncture first because Zev isn't here, so he wanted to make sure he got the modification part. So we'll do that tomorrow, though. Logically, I would have done that now since we just did formula families, but that's okay. We'll do the acupuncture part first. I guess I don't have a whole lot of. It's not a whole lot of validity to what I'm going to say about acupuncture since I actually haven't practiced acupuncture in many years. That's not really true. I mean, I do occasionally do some acupuncture on patients of mine who I've worked with for a very long time, and they kind of still are used to. And every once in a while, I throw a few needles in. But mostly, I made the decision a few years back to only do herbal medicine because I wanted to be 100% certain that my results only relied on my herbs and, of course, placebo. And so, and so which I try to eliminate as much as possible by not being too nice to my patients. People are like, oh, why is he so mean and curt and he doesn't say much? Is because I don't want to create too much placebo. I want to see what the herbs do without me, being like, you are better. You are better, So, no, that's not true. I mean, it's just, just joking. But basically, I did want to make sure that I saw pure results with my herbs because I want to know as much as I possibly can about herbs. And so, I didn't want any of my results skewed, right? Because, of course, acupuncture does a lot, right? And I wanted to make sure that if I used herbs and acupuncture at the same time, I wanted to know beyond the shadow of a doubt what was actually doing the thing, right? So that's kind of one of the main things. But before that, I was still doing acupuncture, and years back, when I started my own, life story with Chinese medicine back in Belgium, my mother was seeing an acupuncturist in Belgium, and he was definitely the uncontested best acupuncturist in Belgium. He's like the kind of like the same caliber as the Benskis and the Wisemans of the U.S., but then for Belgium, like he went to study in China before China was opened up and all really early on, and he ultimately became a very big. He was big on needling, that is true. But he also was very big on Shanghan. That kind of all his years of study led him to say, when I always say like no Chinese medicine physician ever became great without knowing the Shanghan. That's his sentence. That's his quote. That's me quoting him, which is exactly true. So he definitely was big on Shanghan, and then he was at the time already, which is I'm talking early '90s. He was already working on a book about Shanghan acupuncture based on Shanghan theory, inspired by a few people who in China have done research on that, right? And so ultimately, I was able to also get my hands on a book by a guy. What's his name again? I'm blanking on his name. A Chinese professor. It was a little book that was published in the '80s, where he basically takes every line of the Shanghan Lun and has a acupuncture point prescription for every line by line, which is very interesting. It was very interesting. Now, I must say that I almost did not adopt any of his point prescriptions because I didn't find myself in those point prescriptions. And what does it mean you don't find yourself in your point prescriptions? Because ultimately, we're trained to use certain points, and we learn that during our training from our teachers, and that those are the points that you get used to and you become familiar with and become comfortable with. And ultimately, it becomes a little hard to really shift to a totally different type of point selection method, right? So that's also one of the things that I will want to share with you here is that when you carry what I want you to carry away is the methodology of point selection, not the actual point selection, right? The actual point selection, I've had once a big discussion once when I presented the seminar for the first time in Germany in '04, and some person picked a bone with me and said, no, I think because here I use gallbladder 41 in the Sha Cai Hu Tang point prescription, and she was adamant that it should have been gallbladder 40, and it's kind of like it's kind of like Allah is greater than God, who is greater than Buddha, who is greater than, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, you know, I mean, like, so you like Allah, and I like, you know, I like Buddha, you know, and there's no arbitration at that point, you know, and because it's completely subjective. Like, you feel that that's better, and I feel that that's better, and at the end of the day, in clinic, and I think that that's kind of how it is in the real world, is that you each get 10 patients that you do the same protocol on, and they do it with 40, and I do it with 41, and you know what? The results are going to be about the same. There's not going to be a whole lot of difference, because that's not what it is about. Like, one point, in my opinion, doesn't make or break it. It's the overall message that you're sending to the body. It's almost like an acupuncture prescription is like you're reading a paragraph out loud to the body, and there's just one adjective in one of the sentences that you chose a different word for, right? And so, yes, it conveys a slightly different charge, a slightly different sentiment to the body, but not enough that it would alter the complete effect that the whole paragraph has that you just read to the body, right? So when you're doing acupuncture or herbs, all you're doing is you're talking to the body, and you're talking to the body in a different type of language. So you're accessing a different part of its response mechanism, right? With herbs, you're talking in a molecular language, in a chemical language, right? You're just introducing chemicals, introducing molecules into the body, and those will then provoke a response from the body, right? So then the body will basically say, oh, that's what you want me to do. Okay, I didn't get that previously, but now that you make it so clear with this chemical message that you're sending to me, I'll go ahead and do this for you, right? So that's kind of what happens. And so with acupuncture, it's like a pin code, no pun intended, right? So it's like you're punching in your pin code to unlock this problem that the body is stuck in. The body's health is tucked away in a safe, right? And you wanna jailbreak it. You wanna open it up. It's the same thing. You're talking to the body with a certain type of code. The goal is that you make your message as loud and clear as possible, right? But then, still by using the lowest volume, right, and the least amount of words, because you don't want to overwhelm the body, right? So you want to speak with it from a tremendous place of authority, with a tremendous amount of clarity. You don't want to be like, listen, no, seriously, you got to listen to this. No, listen up, look me in the eye. Wait, no, listen, seriously, you got to believe me. If you start to talk to a person like this, nobody's going to buy it, right? Nobody's going to buy it, right? You want to speak from that place of authority. You want to make it very, very clear, right? You're not going to do that, you know? Like somebody wants to pick a fight in a bar, you're like, I wouldn't do that if I were you. It's a much stronger thing than God damn blah blah blah. You know, then definitely you're getting into a fight. But if you say, you know what, I wouldn't do that if I were you. I don't think that's a good idea, and I don't want to get into a fight. And 2 sentences, and normally that's a very clear thing, right? So it's kind of the same with the body. You want to make your messages as clear as possible from a very calm, peaceful place, because your formulas, your herbal prescriptions, when you look at the herbs, they're very well-rounded, they're very balanced, they're very safe. They harmonize the center, right? There's protection for the middle burner. It's never very offensive to the body, except for when you really need to smack that body around and snap it out of whatever very, very dangerous, bad situation it is in. Okay, that's different, right? You have to use a purgative, a cathartic, or a strong diaphoretic or something like that. But those are extreme cases. Most of the formulas are very, very gentle and very, very stable. Right, so they send a very clear message. It's the same that we want to do with acupuncture, right? You have to understand that you're talking to the body, right, in a certain way, and you want to make that message as clear as possible. So that's why I developed this methodology for acupuncture according to the 6 confirmations, because what analytical or differentiational system is better fit for acupuncture use than the 6 confirmation system, right? A 6 confirmation system, it is already based on the 6 pairs of channels, right? The 6 pairs of channels, you've got the hand channels, the foot channels, right? Taiyang Yang Ming Sha Yang, Taiyin Sha Yin Jue Yin, boom, there you have it, right? So those 6 channels or those 6 confirmations are the physical component, the part of your body, the part of your the component of your body that interacts with the outside world, right? So how when we talk about, oh yeah, the external influence of the 6 Qi exercises its effect onto the body, and then it triggers a certain set of reactions and responses from the body. So it'll exercise that effect through the skin, right? Because your skin is is your thermal sensor. So as far as your body is concerned, the skin is the thermal sensor, right? So and it's not just thermal; it's also pressure and moisture balance, right? So it's thermal, pressure, and moisture. So changes in the barometric pressure, changes in the temperature, and then changes in the moisture degree in the air around you are all sensed by the skin. And even Western medicine, biomedicine, is aware of that there is no computer powerful enough to sense and compute that many findings in that fast, at that highest speed as the human skin can, right? Our brains are amazing on that level, all while we're completely oblivious to it, right? So it's not even using our conscious mind, that part of our computational power. It's all happening at the back end of the machine, right? So it's very powerful. So basically, your body, skin, your senses it, and if something goes wrong, it are the channels in that skin that receive that message, basically. Like, uh-oh, too much cold, and all of a sudden your Taiyang channel freezes up, right? Because it was unable to kind of regulate and lock the yang in to warm you up fast enough, etc., etc. And then, or oh my God, too much heat, and then all of a sudden you start drying out and you start heating up because your yang ming was unable to keep your yang in, and now you're starting to heat up and dry out, etc., etc. So basically, it is those channels that register the messages, and of course, that's why ultimately an illness can have also an interior aspect, because it starts on the exterior and ultimately can impair the interior parts that are linked to that channel. Yeah. So in Shanghan scholarship throughout history, there have been schools of thought that considered the whole Shanghan to be a channel-based theory, the whole six confirmation theory to be a channel-based theory. I think that's a little bit too small. I've mentioned that before. It's not just a channel. It's more of, in the physical world, it's more of a realm, right? A confirmation is a realm which includes all kinds of physical components. And larger than that, if you're belonging to the Yun Qi school, then it's not even just a realm, which means it's not just a place or a grouping of places. It's also a, I talked about this before, Jing Ji, and the Ji is kind of like a rhythm, there's a certain rhythm to it, which means there's a time component to it all. So a time and direction aspect to it all. So it's not just a realm, it's also a chronological aspect to it. So it makes it a time and a place and a time, not just a place, right? And so it's only calling it a channel-based theory is maybe a bit too narrow, right? Yes, I mean, the channels are an important part of it. The channels in your skin and your muscles are the ones that respond when something in nature is not beneficial to your health, right? They are the ones that respond, right? And then their failing of the failure of their physiology is always the initial onset of the illness. And then gradually, because the yang that circulates on a certain channel is then linked to the yang of the organs connected to that channel on the interior, and then ultimately the pathology can also move inward, right? So that's kind of what we see, right? Taiyang disease, right? You first cool off on the periphery, then you start to have a fever. The yang starts to leave through the surface, of course, which then leads the bladder to have less yang because all the yang moves outward. Then the bladder starts to cool off. Bladder starts to cool off. Bladder starts to contract. Bladder contracts. Urination gets a little bit unsmooth and inhibited, and ultimately you get difficult urination, right? So that's how the sequence of events going from a Taiyang channel perspective, which is purely surface, to a Taiyang organ perspective, right? Where it's more the organ that's impaired, right? And then of course that starts to heat up again, and then because there's a time component. It's not just a channel. There's also a time component, and by virtue of us following the sun's rhythm, not the moon's rhythm, but six confirmations, because the damage is too young, you follow the sun's rhythm, and the rhythm of the sun is a 24-hour cycle, right? So it follows this kind of 24-hour cycle. So then, of course, by the next 24-hour cycle, you will find yourself in Yang Ming, right? Coming from Taiyang, and then you'll find yourself in Yang Ming. So that's kind of what we see. So the channel component is actually quite important. And there's so much I think we can do with acupuncture to work alongside our herbal treatment. So then the way I used to work with acupuncture was that aside from the musculoskeletal patients who come in, backache, whatever, right? And then you still do a basic channel differentiation, right? Where on the back does it hurt, right? Is it more flanks? Is it more lower back? Is it more closer to the spine? Is it whatever, and then you choose points along that region, right? Say, my shoulder hurts. Is it the front? Is it the back? Is it, anterior, posterior, medial, whatever, right? And then you do channel, based on the channels that run into that area, you choose points along that channel, right? People come to me, my IT band is really tight, and you take their pulse, and they've got wiry guan positions. I'll give them a Sinisan. Because, it's just Shaoyang channel, right? I mean, obviously, your channels run there, and that's an herbal formula that is going to relax spasms and contractions when wood and earth are not vibing well of Shaoyang, right? And so you give that formula, and it benefits their ability to relax those areas. So that stuff is real, even though you can't show where the channels really are if you cut open a corpse, but the stuff is definitely real. It's a functional system. It's not material. So my goal was ultimately with acupuncture is to have my acupuncture be an immediate relief mechanism. Right? That's how I approached it. Now, that might not be how you approach it, but I'm just sharing how I always looked at it. Right? My herbs were going to kick in as soon as you stuff them in your mouth, as soon as you swallow them into your stomach, just a matter of time before the herbs are going to kick in. Right? So that's not a problem. I don't need to worry about that. But patients come in, by the time they get their herbs, by the time they come home, by the time they boil them, how much do they take of it, whatever, right? I also wanted to kind of start the treatment right now, right here, while they're in my office. Whether that was internal medicine, whether that was body aches and pains, whether that was acute, whether that was chronic, I don't care. I want to get the message started. I want to start the conversation with the body's system, telling the body, okay, I need you to start working on this, right? So that's how I wanted it to be the immediate thing. So I started to look at acupuncture as, okay, that'll give you some relief now, that'll get the treatment started, and then you go home and you take your herbs, and then the herbs will kick in. The next week when you come back, again, we'll reinforce the acupuncture message, and we'll give you a refill of your herbs based on whatever you need then, right? So that's kind of how I always approached it. And I wanted to make sure that my treatment was in line, that my acupuncture treatment was in line with my herbal treatment, right? Like I said, once you understand that all you're doing in Chinese medicine is talking to the body and basically gently suggesting to the body how to fix itself, right? Any other way of thinking about the body and treatment and your role in it is going to be an allopathic way of thinking, right? You're going to basically say, well, I am the one curing you. I don't think that's true. Right? If there is a piece of dry stool stuck in the intestines, if you are the one curing the patient, by all means, show me how you're going to get that piece out. Go for it, right? I don't think it's going to happen, right? It's impossible. It's the herbs that are doing things. And ultimately, if you really think that the treatment is embodied within the herb, you're also wrong. It's not the treatment embodied within the herb. It's the herb goes into the body and talks to the body and triggers a response from the body. And it's the body's response that works, right? Because if the treatment was truly embodied in the herb, then every treatment would always be successful. Because all it would take is you giving the herb, and it would always be successful because the treatment is embodied in the herb, which is obviously not the case. Why do you give? And it could be, let's not even talk about misdiagnosis. Let's talk about accurate diagnosis. You give the herb. Some people it works. Some people it doesn't work. It obviously that proves you that the treatment is not embodied in the herb. Health is not something that's contained inside the plant. Right? The only thing embodied in the herb is the message. And some help if necessary, but it still is the message. Right? Sometimes it's like, okay, go to the grocery store and here's $5 to buy what I want you to buy. Sometimes there's a little bit of nourishment inside the plants or a little bit of help, right? Let's go to the grocery store together. Let me walk with you. But there's never is such a thing as here you go, do this, and then no, here let me do this for you, kind of a thing. That is never embodied in the herbs, because otherwise herbs would always work. Right? As long as you get them in the system, success would always be guaranteed, and we know that's not the case. Right? So what you're doing is you're telling the body, all right, this is what I think you should do. Right? You should open the pores, you should warm your surface, you should send more blood to the periphery, blah, 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 blah. And then the body's like, okay, and then it opens the pores, floats more warm blood to the periphery, and as a result of that, it cures itself. But as a result of curing itself, it also restored its own physiology. Because what you're doing is telling the body, under circumstance X that you find yourself in now, basically, you need to do action Y and Z. And by starting action Y and Z under this circumstance X that you find yourself in, this will undo circumstance X, and it will bring you back to, the initial, initial state of A, like the initial state of being. That's the goal. So you're always, every situation the body can be in that is off from its normal physiology, for every one of those possibilities, there is a message that you can send to the body to bring you back from that place. Right? For everything, there is a solution. For every, it's kind of like, how would I describe this? It's kind of like a Rubik's Cube, right? Doesn't matter how fucked up it is, there always, if you were to just really, really know all the steps back there, from every possible misplacement of all the little cubes that you could possibly have, there is a way back to the normal original state of the cube. Right? So what we are learning is, we are learning how to navigate, how to guide the body back to scratch, to zero, from a myriad of possible pathological ways of being. Right? The body, it's like a parent, and the kids have gotten themselves in 100 different types of trouble, and you have 100 solutions for each, and you have a solution for each and every one of those. Right? So it's kind of the same way. Long story short, you are conversing with the body, you're talking to the body, you're telling the body, this is what I need you to do. Right? Because you're now finding yourself in this situation, and you need to go back to that situation. This is what I need you to do. You're currently so stuck in your pathology, and you've gotten yourself in so much trouble that you need me to bail you out. Right? You need, Mom, Dad, could you come pick me up? I'm not sure where I am, kind of a situation. Right? Many of us must have been there before. And so Mom and Dad, they come, and they're really nice about it. Right? And so we're going to say, okay, this is what we're going to do. You're going to go this, you're going to do this, and this, and this. So we're going to talk to the body, and we're going to have to make it as clear as possible. Make the message as clear as possible. So knowing that you can talk to the body in kind of electrical terms, right? Like using acupuncture, accessing these kind of areas where you can have this kind of nervous, Dutchy kind of electrical feeling, right? Also knowing that you can do the same thing with herbs. Also knowing that you can do the same thing with talk therapy, you can do the same thing with qigong. Like there's many body work, many ways of doing that. The two ways that Zandongjing has chosen to do are mostly herbs, and second of all, acupuncture, right? But herbs one, and then second, acupuncture, because he does endorse acupuncture. We will see that very clearly. So basically, we will talk to the body, and we have to make our message as clear as possible. And we have to make sure that the message that we are sending with our herbs is the same as the message that we are sending with our acupuncture, which should be the same as the message that we send with our diet at the time, right? You can't say to the body, hey, how's it going? I've got some Da Jian Zong Tang for you. Right, because I really need you to warm your stomach up. And then you give them, then you start needling some heat clearing points, and you feed the patient a gallon of ice cream. Is your Da Jian Zong Tang going to work? No, there is no Da Jian Zong Tang strong enough to counter that. You know what I mean? Like you can't. And that happens a lot, right? We give herbs to our patient, and then they undo the whole effect by, like you're tonifying their heart young because they've got palpitations and sweat a lot, and then they go to the sauna. And you're like, dude, why do you do that? It's like that's one expensive sauna session. Like it's like when I say, when people buy all these tonics and herbs and stuff, it's like that's one expensive bowel movement because that's not what you needed. And so you've wasted a bunch of money because it just kind of created damp in your system, and you got loose stool from it, and that was it, right? So basically, you want to make sure that the message is unified. And that's kind of going to be the main idea that I try to convey with this seminar for today, because this weekend is actually 2 little seminars, right? Like one on modification of formulas, and then one on acupuncture, right? So how can we unify the message? How can we make sure that the acupuncture is saying exactly the same thing as the herbal treatment is saying, right? And if you were indeed a Tui Na specialist, then you'd have to somehow figure out to say exactly the same message with your body work, right? In the same way that if you want to do Qigong, you want to make exactly the same message there, right? If they need diaphoresis, I assume you're not going to let them visualize to bring their energy into their kidneys, or you know what I mean, like which would bring everything inside. You know what I mean? Like you want to bring things more diaphoretic, more outside. I'm going to spend very little time on physiology, because this is often a seminar that we sometimes offer as it's an intro for people who want to know what we do. So there's a few extra things that we normally would do for them, but basically, when we're looking at the Biaoben Zongqi theory, very often you could look at the Ben as the root, right, as the organ. You can look at the Biao as the channel, right? That's one way of looking at it. Right? Another way of looking at it is, of course, from the perspective of that the Ben is often the foot channel and the Biao is the hand channel. That's another way of looking at it, right? The branch and the root of things. Branch and root is often used in acupuncture theory. I'm not an expert on that. You got to talk to some Neijing experts to really understand that. The Biaoben Zongqi system shows us that basically the pairs that are formed, right? The Taiyang Shaoyin pair that we are so familiar with, right? Kidney and heart is a pair. Right, the bladder and the small intestine is a pair. The gallbladder and the triple burner is a pair. You have a hand pair and a foot pair, right? So in Taiyang, for example, you would have Taiyang small intestine, hand channel, Taiyang bladder, foot channel, right? But then the Zongqi, the qi within that ensures the healthy, normal physiological functioning of these are, of course, the Shaoyin kidney and the Shaoyin heart, right? And then you see that just from an organ and element perspective, right, then heart and small intestine, they are part of one element, right? And that kidney and bladder are part of one element, the water element, right? So what that practically means is that any conformation disease involves at least 4 channels, right? Because if you have Taiyang, it means that you didn't have enough Shaoyin, right? Because if you got too much cold, it means you didn't have enough warmth, right? So ultimately, when we say that, well, Taiyang disease is cold on the periphery, it is because your Shaoyin fire of the emperor underneath was not able to keep that periphery warm and healthy enough so that it would have not gotten breached by the external cold, right? So that'll be part of the methodology where it will allow us to access multiple aspects of the conformation, multiple aspects of the body. So the goal is going to be that what channels can we needle at what time, what channels should we not needle at what time, to kind of keep the message unified, right? So if you're doing a treatment, and you're doing a Guizhitang, and you know that Guizhitang is for Taiyang disease, but you also know that Guizhi is the primary herb to support the heart, then you kind of know that Guizhi treats the Zongqi of Taiyang. Right? Guizhi treats, indeed, the qi within, the quality contained within, which is the imperial fire of the heart. That's what Guizhi supports. It fans the wind to create more fire of the heart. And when there's more fire of the heart, the blood is more warm, and then this warm blood will float into the periphery, to the collaterals, and keep your periphery warm, right? So that's going to be one of the aspects, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but basically what it means is that when you have Taiyang disease, you will be allowed to treat Taiyang small intestine, Taiyang bladder, Shaoyin kidney, and Shaoyin heart. At least those 4 will be part of your simplex approach to Taiyang disease, right? Same thing for Yangming, right? Hand Yangming, large intestine, foot Yangming, stomach, hand Taiyin lung, foot Taiyin spleen. All 4 of them are going to be involved in a certain capacity. Now, of course, if you're treating a Taiyang if you're giving a Taiyang treatment, then most of the main strength of the treatment has to be focused on Taiyang points, right? Don't go now and treat. Okay, you've got Taiyang disease. Of the 10 needles that I'm gonna put 8 on Shaoyin points and only 2 on Taiyang points. Imagine what the message is to the body. The message is guide your yang to Shaoyin. Because that's kind of what Zhang Dongjing's, we'll talk about that in a second. That's Zhang Dongjing's idea on acupuncture, is that it guides yang. It brings yang to an area, which basically means it brings blood to an area. How do you know it brings blood to an area, Arno? Well, when I stick a needle a bit too hard, it's going to bleed. Right? So obviously there's blood in that area. So it's going to guide the awareness of the body, which travels along the blood. Remember, we know that from the whole concept of blood impediment disease, right? Xuebi. In the Jingui, there's a disease where there's numbness in the skin. It means there's no yang and no blood flowing through a certain area. If there's no yang and no blood flowing through a certain area, that area goes numb. Zhang Dongjing says, use acupuncture to guide the yang qi, which basically means bring awareness, bring sensation back to that area. When sensation comes back to that area, blood and yang will both come to that area. That area will warm up, the area will be red, there's more blood going there. If you needle it hard, it'll bleed, etc., etc. That's why bleeding therapy is a very good therapy for areas where there's some numbness. Right? You bleed those areas. Right? That's why acupuncture has to hurt. Herbs have to taste like ass, and acupuncture has to hurt like ass. Right? Because that's how it works. You know, and the whole development of ever thinner needles and ever pain-free acupuncture, in my opinion, is the same as pain-free dentistry, right? You have no incentive to brush your teeth if your dentist doesn't hurt you, right? I mean, simply put, I mean, especially with kids. Did you like how that how that felt? No, it hurt. Are you gonna brush your teeth? Yes, I will. Okay. Right? It's like the government of Singapore, right? Are you gonna spit that gum on the floor? Because we're gonna give you 10 lashes of the whip if you do it one more time, right? It's called terror politics, and it works. And but it's basically true though, as far as if you start masking the flavor, if you bypass the taste aspect of it, Chinese herbs start working as soon as they enter your palate. They work in your mouth first because it's an aromatherapy. Aromatherapy, not in the spa sense, but aroma-based therapy, right? Because the taste already activates certain. The fact that you taste something means that there's certain nerve endings that were stimulated. It means that your brain is interpreting something as, oh, this tastes bitter. That's a brain response. Right? Your brain responds, oh, bitter, oh, sweet, oh, pungent, spicy, you know? That's all nerve stuff. So as soon as the herbs hit your palate, they basically already start talking to your brain right away. So as soon as when you start bypassing that, when you put a bunch of sweets in your herbs, when you, I don't know, put it in capsules, and granted, sometimes it's convenient, I understand that, but you actually lose already a part of the treatment. Same thing with acupuncture. When you bypass the pain mechanism, you already lose part of the treatment. Right? That is a fact. So the thinner the needles and everything, that's not something that was actually is not a Chinese thing, right? Let's put it that way. In the old days, there's a reason why. I mean, of course, you're not gonna. It's not gonna become a torture technique, right? It's not. It's not that it has to be only pain, but it definitely has to bring the awareness to the body, and the awareness is brought to the body by truly having De Qi, right? In every point, you want to try to get the De Qi. That is definitely what the Neijing wants you to do, right? So. Also, there, if you can have good De Qi with a very thin needle, okay, that's fine too. Then you truly are skilled. For people of lesser skill, such as myself, I need a thicker needle to get good De Qi, like get consistent De Qi in a higher percentage of points, right? But if you can get it with a really thin needle, fine, right? And don't trust when your patient says yes, 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 yes. We all know that. Half of the time, it's actually no, 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 no. They just want you to stop. So. Trust your left hand, needle with your right hand, trust your left hand, or the other way around, needle with your left hand, trust your right hand. Don't trust what your patient says. So that's that. So basically, the pairs become very important in the development of our methodology. I'm not going to talk too much about this. It's pretty straightforward stuff. We've talked about this already. But the pairs, you are allowed to access all four, right? So that's kind of because of the whole Biaobenzongqi theory. Hand channel, foot channel, and then the interior counterparts of also their hand and foot channel. Right. Next is Kai He Shu. I'm not going to go through the whole theory. We've talked about that a million times already, right? Opening, closing, pivoting, and so forth and so forth. The reason why Kai He Shu comes into play, in my opinion, now, I might be wrong or not, I don't know. But what would be, let me ask you a question. What would be the difference between tonifying a yin conformation, tonifying a point on a yin channel versus reducing a point on a yang channel as far as the overall effect on the body? What do you tonify when you tonify a yin channel point? I mean, what do you reduce when you're reducing a yang channel point? That kind of makes sense, right? You're reducing yang, you're draining yang away from that point, right? But what do you tonify when you tonify a yin channel point? I'm talking needle technique, right? It's tricky, doesn't it? It's interesting that we're all licensed to practice this, and nobody has the answer to the simple question like that. I'm not going to say I have the answer. I don't have the answer either. But it's one of my pet peeves with acupuncture is that we do it, but we kind of don't really know what's going on, right? What would be the difference? Like, would I be tonifying the yin, the amount of water, symbolical water of that point, and then by putting more yin and controlling yang, what would be the difference then as opposed to reducing yang and then to kind of bring the yang down? Wouldn't that, relatively speaking, also bring my yin up? You know what I mean? Like, that's always something that I've wondered about, mostly from the perspective of technique, right? I'm talking acupuncture technique now, right? Clockwise, counterclockwise, more inwards, right? With clockwise turns versus more outward with counterclockwise turns, or pingbu pingxie, right? Because I was never personally able to answer that question, and I never met anybody who was able to answer that question. A lot of people have an opinion on it, but nobody actually could back it up with a source text, because it's not really discussed. Because of that, I always used pingbu pingxie. Like, it's kind of like you go to the soccer game and you make sure you got two scarves, right? One team and the other teams, because you never know who you're going to run into in the street. And you're like, I'm not bleeding for my team, I'm sorry. So it's kind of the same, pingbu pingxie, because, well, kind of keep it neutral. You tonify as much as you reduce. At least it just basically means I activate the point, and whatever the point does. I'm not going to worry about it too much, right? Until I started thinking about opening, closing, pivoting. And I started linking that with the theory of chapter 21 in the Neijing and the Suwen, where Damba, the Japanese commentator, says, when you doing what the element likes, or doing what the organ likes, is to tonify. going against what the organ likes is to reduce. Remember when we talked about the flavors, right? A pungent flavor tonifies the wood element because the wood wants to spread freely. Pungent helps wood spread freely. That's why we will call pungent to tonify wood. It's a purely functional way of looking at it. So that is one thing that I had in mind. The second thing I had in mind is then, of course, opening, closing, pivoting. And what that means is that Shaoyang wants to pivot, which means Shaoyang wants to produce more yang and keep that yang mobile and moving. Right? Taiyang wants to open. It wants to open the surface. It wants to bring yang and float yang to the periphery. Open the blood so the yang can vent from the blood and warm up other parts of the body, especially warm up the water element of your body. Right? Yang Ming wants to close. It wants to close the pores. It wants to bring yang inward. It wants to reduce the amount of yang, get it smaller. Because if the yang stays too big, then Yang Ming stays too dry, and then the water can't come back. The water can't be born. Right? So from the perspective of opening, closing, pivoting, those are their functions. So those are what those conformations want to do. So if that's what these conformations want to do, then tonifying a point on those conformations actually will help it do what it wants to do. And reducing a point on that conformation will go against that and therefore prevent it from doing what it wants to do. Right? So then, and I'll give you a simple example. With this piece of theory would basically say then that if you have ministerial fire flaring, which means Shaoyang is pivoting too much, because it's too much yang being born too prematurely, right? It's 7 a.m. and it's already as hot as if it were high noon. Then you would reduce the Shaoyang point. You would make Shaoyang pivot less. So less yang would be born, therefore cool off Shaoyang fire. So cooling off Shaoyang fire, when needling a point on the Shaoyang conformation channels, you do have to reduce that. Now in Sini-san, where the ministerial fire is not really moving enough and it's not really reaching every part of your body and certain areas stay cold, especially the fingertips and the toes, right? Then you'd actually have to tonify the points on Shaoyang. Because tonifying the points on Shaoyang will help you produce more yang and circulate more yang. Right? Same thing with Taiyang. If you have a Taiyang disease and it is a Ma Huang Tang, right, and Taiyang is not opening enough, then you have to tonify the points on the Taiyang conformation because it will help them do what they want to do, which is to open. So tonifying a point on Taiyang in a closed surface will actually help you open the surface. But in a Guizhitang scenario, tonifying a point on the Taiyang conformation would actually make your Taiyang open even more. So in a Guizhitang, when the surface is already open and you want to kind of regulate Taiyang, close it down a little bit, you'd actually have to reduce the point on Taiyang. So it's a very functional way of looking at it. Right? Yang Ming heat. Yang Ming is way too open, right? And you need to close it, right? So you need to have intense high fever, Bai Hu Tang type of fever, right? You want to close the surface and you want to keep the yang in, you need to tonify the points on Yang Ming, not reduce them. Because as you reduce the points on Yang Ming, you're actually going to reduce Yang Ming's yang, therefore damage its ability to stay closed. So therefore its own yang is going to get even weaker and therefore float out even more. Which is counterintuitive sometimes, because especially with Yang Ming, we have a tendency to only reduce in time of fever, right? As opposed to when Yang Ming has constipation and fullness in the abdomen and Yang Ming is too closed and cannot open properly, then we can reduce the Yang Ming point. We can reduce its closing function so that it would open more. Does that make sense? So it's a very dynamic view on how to employ your acupuncture technique. I figured that out, or I developed this way of looking at it towards the end of my acupuncture career. So basically, I never really subjected that to clinical trial, clinical use for long periods of time, right? So from that perspective, maybe I don't have enough clinical evidence to back it up where I could clearly see a difference between, I've consistently now only tonified and consistently now only reduced whenever what scenario, right? But so I don't really have enough data yet, but there's definitely something that I want you guys to maybe be mindful of and pay more attention to, and see if it influences your results better. Right? From what I can tell so far, it does, but I don't really haven't really used it long enough. I mean, I only did acupuncture professionally for 10 years, so I feel like, and of that, only maybe about 6 years in only a Shanghan context, in the Shanghan only context, right? 04 to about 03 to 09. Yeah, that's about right. So only about 6 years with only Shanghan formulas in combination. So my first the article on acupuncture, Shanghan acupuncture, came out I think in 04. Right. So that's another thing. Opening, closing, pivoting. That's why normally when I give this as a separate seminar, I'll revisit that theory so that people are brought up to speed. What is opening, closing, pivoting? What is Biaoben Zongqi? So then when I talk about it later in point selection and technique selection, it makes more sense. The lines, if you want to read them, read them. I don't want to read them. Good. So then I'm going to we're going to quickly glance at the whole Shanghan and the Jingui and see everywhere that Dandong mentions acupuncture, right? And it's kind of surprising as to how often he mentions acupuncture. It's actually quite surprising. He is, of course, the herbalist. It's all about herbs, but still he really mentions acupuncture a lot, right? And moxa also. So let's have a look at this. Chapters 1, 2, and 3, which are the original Song versions chapters, right? Pulse differentiation, pulse assessment, and the cold damage outline. There's mentions in there, no big deal, right? I'm not going to read those per se. Points that are mentioned in those chapters, or in a lot of chapters, liver 14 is probably the most mentioned of all the points that he mentions. He just loves liver 14 for any type of kind of Shaoyang pattern, heat entering the blood chamber, mania, rage, all of those things. He mentions liver 14. He mentions CV14, gallbladder 20, governing vessel 16. A bunch of points for stiff neck and wind invasions on Taiyang and things like that, right? He mentions the 59 water points of the Neijing, where he says for warm disease, needle the 59 water points. So I couldn't recite you the 59 water points of the Neijing, to be honest with you. But it's 59 points that have a water affinity, and those are the ones that you treat when there's heat disease. Those are points that are heat clearing, something like that. So he mentions for warm disease, needle the 59 points, right? Need the 59 water points. And then techniques mentioned are just regular needling, and then of course warming needles, right? He does mention the whole fire needle technique, which he mentions it mostly in its as a mistreatment, right? Basically, what it means is that the fire needle is a technique. It's called cui ci in the glowing needle of the Neijing, right? Of part of the 19 techniques, and it has its own set of indications, right? And it should never be used for releasing the surface. And that's the problem that he encounters a lot, apparently, in the Han Dynasty, is that a lot of lesser skilled physicians, they know about fire needling, and they think that that's the best way to diaphrese a patient. But basically, it's a very uncontrolled way of diaphoresing a patient, right? Because it doesn't only warm you up and make you sweat, it hurts, it burns you, it creates a tremendous startle response, and especially a startle response at the time when you already have heart-yang deficiency due to the Taiyang disease, etc., etc. So it's a very wrong way to treat, a very bad way to treat Taiyang disease. So most often he mentions it, oh yeah, this is the wrong thing to do in Taiyang disease. Same thing with moxa. He doesn't use moxa for yang confirmation disease. We would think, oh, the patient is cold, let's give him some moxa. No, moxa per Danonjing is used for the yin confirmations only, right? So not enough yang on the yin confirmations, you put moxa on the yin confirmations. Well, I know, excuse me. Or no, why not moxa on the yang conformations? Because if moxa adds yang, then obviously you never ever have to use it on a yang conformation. Because if a yang conformation doesn't have enough yang, you can't have a yang conformation disease. So if the yang conformation is so lacking in yang that you would have to add moxa to it, actually this patient finds him or herself in a yin conformation disease, right? So if you have a taiyang disease, let's say, your taiyang has not enough yang on it, that basically means you have Shaoyin disease, because all the yang of taiyang comes from Shaoyin. It's dong qi, it's qi within. It is Shaoyin that supplies taiyang with its yang, right? It is taiyin that supplies yang ming with its water, right? It is taiyin that supplies Shaoyang with its qi, with its gas, right? That's where it comes from, right? So otherwise, if you don't, if you don't understand that, then basically, oh yeah, it's cold on taiyang, let's warm taiyang up. No, cold on taiyang means that there's excess cold superimposed onto it, and then you have to get rid of the excess cold. And that is not done with moxa. Moxa is for deficiency cold. Moxa is only and always for deficiency cold. Now, I am of course talking Han Dynasty. I'm talking Zhangdongjing. I'm not talking, later developments. I'm not talking, I don't know, Japanese scholars who use moxa for a lot of things, or mini moxa, grain moxa, all those different. I'm not talking about. I don't know anything about that, right? I only know this and what Zhangdongjing intends us to do. So Zhangdongjing never needles yin conformations, ever, because needling costs yang. The price you pay for a needle is paid in yang. Needling disperses yang. That's the goal of needling. It moves yang, it disperses yang. That is the very goal of it. And you will only do that in places where, if for people whose bank account can afford it, whose yang bank account has sufficient yang in it, so that when you're dispersing the yang, you don't damage the patient. Right? So needling disperses yang. Needling uses up yang. So if you needle a yin conformation, which I do, don't get me wrong, but it's not how Zhangdongjing would have wanted it to do. Strictly speaking, you should never needle a yin conformation. You do moxa on the yin conformations. You needle the yang conformations. That's the basic idea. Right? Now we've all seen patients like that, where you've needled a yin conformation and they just get so tired, and they just want to go sleep. What does that mean? Shaoyin disease, somnolence, the desire only to sleep. Right? Or even if you leave the needles in too long, what happens? People get super tired because you just lost too much yang. It disperses yang. Right? Like a quick jab with a needle, that'll create yang. Okay? Quickly stick a needle in your butt. Ow! That's right away. You're like, you're on your feet. You're like, what's that? You're all of a sudden you're awake, right? But you stick a needle in and you let them chill out, and you play some new age music for an hour or something like that, and they're like, they're drooling. They become dysfunctional. You have to guide them to the car. Don't operate heavy machinery, right? It's true. You leave the needles in too long, they get very yang deficient. So not to the point that they die, of course, but just at least it'll take them a while to kind of get over that, right? So that's kind of Zhangdongjing's idea. There's a few places where he still allows us to needle in yin conformation disease, and it's more like when there's a certain problem going on, but there still is yang in the system. For example, the most common example is Taohuatang, right? The Taohuatang, which is Shaoyin disease with blood and mucus in the stool. That's still okay. It's the floating yang of Shaoyin that has floated and invaded, dislodged and invaded the metal and causes damage in the metal, large intestine, right? That's still fine. Drooling tongue would be another one that you could still needle. It's Shaoyin disease, but but the urine is trapped, so there's quite a bit of heat in the system because of the trapped urine, so that would still be fine. Yeah, so those would probably still be, according to Zhang still be fine. But all the other ones, typical ganjiang patterns or fuzi patterns, you shouldn't needle. You should not needle. Acupuncture references in the Shanghan Lun in line 8. Line 8, he talks about, it looks like it's about to pass, right? So quickly needle Yangming to prevent passage. Right? You see, this disease is going to go from Taiyang to Yangming. Quickly make Yangming stronger so that it wouldn't get, damaged, so that the passage would be prevented. I actually don't dare to say I've actually even seen effective prevention of passage. Even with herbs, I must say, it's pretty tough to actively prevent a disease from passing from one conformation to the other. I mean, it's easier with herbs than with acupuncture. With acupuncture, when it's going there, it's going there. And just with acupuncture strength alone, I don't know, maybe it's my technique, maybe Zhang was a better needler than I am, but it's sometimes hard to really have it prevent it from going to the next conformation. But that'll also be one of the considerations, is that one of the methodologies will be that in your point choice, it's okay to needle a point that's on the next channel, on the next conformation, to prevent the passage. Line 24, he talks about, you've given some herbs. All it has done is actually make them more vexed. So it kind of says, they're about to, surface is about to open, they're about to sweat, but it's not really happening. So it's it's almost there, and they get really restless because of it, right? Needle, he says, quickly disperse the young needle, these kind of wind points, right? Feng Shi, Feng Fu, right? And then give them some more herbs, and then it'll open, the vexation will go away, and the problem will get better. Balancing liver and spleen, liver 14. Balancing liver and lung, liver 14, right? He uses a lot of liver 14. Needling, how to treat chest bind and glomus, right? Dazui for chest bind, Fei Shu for chest bind, Gan Shu, and Chimen, liver 14 for glomus, right? Those are all points that you can needle to treat either a chest bind or a P, right? And we've talked about chest bind and P and how they kind of have a relationship. There's a certain causality between them, right? Every chest bind pattern actually will have a hard epigastrium, so will have a P, right? Whether a mistreatment becomes a chest bind or whether a mistreatment becomes a glomus, all depends on how your surface was and when it was mistreated. Was the surface open? Was the surface closed? Well, if the surface was closed, was there a fever or not yet a fever, right? If not yet a fever, it just falls inwards, but it just falls into the stomach, but it's what we call a soft P. If the surface was closed but there was a fever, then it becomes a true chest bind. And you've got major chest bind and you've got minor chest bind, right? If the surface was open and it was purged inward, then you'll have a glomus, right? If it was purged repetitively, then you have a glomus that goes pretty deep, right? Then you have a more deficient glomus, etc., etc. So he has some points here to needle, to assist in the treatment in the opening up of the chest bind and the opening up of the glomus. Heat entering the blood chamber, liver 14, right? Hardness under the heart, same thing as the chest bind points there, that's the same. Heat entering the blood chamber, right? And then line 308, you can see the only Shaoyin scenario eligible for needling, which is the one that has kind of the diarrhea, right? It's kind of like a Taohuatang type of diarrhea. Warming needle contraindications, there's plenty of lines where he says don't use warming needle, right? Don't use a warming needle when you've already depleted the fluids, right? You purge the patient's fluids and then you use a warm needle, you're going to make their blood boil, right? And then you're going to create all kinds of bleeding disorders and things like that, right? Where he says the blood vessels on the side of the head collapse inward. Yeah, of course, because you've gotten rid of their body fluids and now you're basically using heat treatment to warm up their blood, so you're going to completely exhaust the blood, right? So there's all these kind of contraindications. Moxa reference is pretty straightforward. Moxa for Shaoyin disease, Moxa for Drain disease. Or no, why no Moxa for Taiyin disease? Well, I think it's the same. I mean, the true treatment. What is the true formula? The real treatment of Taiyin disease in the Shanghan? Sunni tongue, right? Formulas of the Sunni family. So knowing that in the Shaoyin chapter, he can use moxa, you can still use moxa there as well, right? You might choose a more spleen points rather than the kidney points, but it's still the same thing. I would probably use both, and I mean I do use both, right? Moxa contraindications. He talks about a few places where moxa is not the right treatment. There's also external warmth application, right? So it's not really moxa, but it still is a heat application. We call it fire treatment or fire therapy. The type that leads to the whole Guizhi Chushao Jiasuqi Longomuli Joni Tang, the type that leads to Maimendong Tang, those kinds of things, right? All due to larger surface application of heat. Excuse me. Larger surface application of heat on the body, because it draws a lot of yang to the periphery at a time when sometimes that's not the right thing to do, right? What happens when you employ heat onto the body surface? Right? I'm talking even, infrared lamps or TDP lamps or whatever. What happens to the skin? You see that the skin gets really red, right? Gets really red. What does it mean? Why does it get red? Because a lot of blood comes into the skin, right? It's not red food dye number, how much. No, it's because your blood is floating to the skin. So that could be the wrong thing to do. Like maybe your body needs you to send the blood into the organs, not into the skin, right? And you might sometimes just give the wrong treatment and therefore confuse the body, right? So and then sometimes confuse to the point where everything gets messed up, right? Acupuncture references in the Jingui. He says the treatment of malaria, you can use needles for cold malaria. Treatment of blood impediment, that's the one I talked about, needle for numbness, right? He says to treat numbness, use acupuncture because you have to use needles to guide the yang qi, right? Guide the yang qi to a certain area. So no awareness, no sensation in an area, you create a strong, arrival of shen, arrival of awareness, a pain response, right, in that area. Use herbs when acupuncture and moxa is insufficient. So he's basically saying, like, in the Wuto Guizhi Tang, he says, you've done acupuncture, you've done moxa, nothing is working, go for the herbs, right, for the umbilical hernia situation. Stiff back, use Wei Zhong, acupuncture point, bladder 40. He uses the name, he doesn't use Wei Zhong, he uses Aya. He uses the old name for the point. Can't think of it right now. But it's basically bladder 40 for stiff back. I mean, I think we all know that if you want to treat a stiff back, you'd be foolish to skip bladder 40. In the pregnancy disorders, using this kind of whole theory of the development of the fetus on a monthly basis, le xue yang tai shuo, right? So there's a theory of the Han Dynasty that says in different months of gestation, it's different channels and organs in charge of the nourishment and the growth of the fetus, right? Sabine Wilms has written a little article on that based on Xu Zhicai, which is a Jin dynasty herbalist from the dynasty following Zhang Dongjing's dynasty, right, who has kind of like a discourse in his book, Yao Dui, where he talks about, every month there's a different channel and organ in charge of nourishing the fetus, and then these are the herbal prescriptions that you can use in those months to help with the treatment. The herbal prescriptions look really whack to me, so I never use them. They are definitely canonical. When you look at them, they use canonical herbs mostly. It's very little modern herbs that are used. But they're kind of weird in architecture, which means they're definitely of a folk medicine origin, right? They're not like a really beautifully structured medicine origin. So when looking at it, I don't feel compelled to use those herbal prescriptions. I just take the pulse, whatever you need, whenever confirmation needs fixing, I'll fix, right? But he gives an example. In the 7th month, the lung is the one that normally is in charge of nourishing the fetus, right? But when the baby in the 7th month is not thriving, is not growing properly, it means that the lung is not doing its job. So how do we recuperate that without herbs, without intervening with herbs? He says, well, you reduce CV4 and you reduce PC8, right? Yeah, Laogong PC8. Because basically means CV4 is small intestine front moot point, which is imperial fire. PC8 is fire point, I think, on the pericardium channel, which is ministerial fire. So you're reducing fire. You're using needles to reduce fire, so that you basically give metal lung a break, so metal can kind of catch a breath and start nourishing the fetus again. So you stop cracking down on metal by backing the fire off of metal, and then metal can give birth to the nutrition that the baby needs, and then the baby can thrive again. So it's kind of using an acupuncture treatment. I know I must be a crummy acupuncturist because I kind of wouldn't needle CV4 in the 7th month of pregnancy, but I do. I mean, yeah. Still, I was talking to Ed Neal about this. He was also at Pacific Symposium last week, and he's like, yeah, no problem, do it all the time. So if you're an acupuncturist, a real acupuncturist, and that's all you rely on, then that's all fair game. And just for me, it's just kind of like, I don't know if I want to go there, kind of a thing, right? Obviously not like a 5-inch needle either, obviously.
That would be like doing, that test.
The amnio.
Yeah.
Like an amnio.
Exactly. It's when you want to needle the baby. Oh, with the ultrasound. Oh, baby looks a little nauseous. Let me needle his PC6.
That sounds, yeah.
I wonder how you bill that for insurance. Would you bill 2 treatments? I've treated 2 patients with 1 needle. Do you use needles for single use? Do you use this needle twice on the same patient? Single use, 1 needle on 2 patients at the same time. Chapter 22, needle again for heat entering the blood chamber. So again, in chapter 21, he kind of talks about the treatment of women's diseases in general, right? Where he says using acupuncture as part of the regimen in conjunction with your herbal treatment. Chapter 22, he talks about heat entering the blood chamber, again, liver 14, right? So your standard Xiao Cai Hu Tang. If you want to sum up Xiao Cai Hu Tang in one acupuncture point, it is liver 14, right? I think if you do acupuncture, then every Xiao Cai Hu Tang patient you encounter should be needled liver 14. Yes. I'm going kind of fast because I kind of, whatever, it's that's why I normally have other people teach this seminar. Just I don't feel like I have a whole lot to say. I think it's pretty. Yeah, I know, but Zev's gonna kill me if I do that, but that's okay. I think I can take it. Formula translation methodology. I think this is going to be the most important thing. And it's definitely not complete either. I think this is all a living piece of knowledge, I think. And so years back, the methodology of formula translation was simpler, had less considerations. Slowly, I've got a few extra considerations into it, right? First of all, I think there's a very strong location component as far as the symptomology is concerned of a certain conformation disease in relationship to which channels are affected. Right? There's a reason why in Taiyang disease your back gets so tight. Right? There's a reason why when you have Taiyang Yangming disease your shoulders suffer a lot. Right? There's a reason why when you have a headache and it's a Taiyang headache, it's occipital. There's a reason why Yangming headaches are frontal. right? There's a reason why Shaoyang neck pain is more, gallbladder 20 and down, like, the neck on the sides of your neck, right? There's a reason why in triple yang disease, your whole torso has a difficulty, like, bending and turning sideways, because all your yang channels, the front ones, the back ones, and the sideway ones, are all congested. So your body gets very rigid and has a hard time moving sideways, right? There's, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a very strong channel component to it. So I do believe that there's a strong correlation between the symptomology you see in confirmation diseases and the location of the channels. And I've tried stimulating students of mine for years to do some research on that and look into that, and nobody actually has. Which is fine, because I don't personally care that much, since I don't do acupuncture, but I strongly believe that if you aren't big on acupuncture, or like my former UK group, where for years they had a hard time using all kinds of herbs, right? And they still have, actually. I always told them, I said, you have to just do more research on acupuncture, like try to learn more creative ways of tackling the same illnesses with acupuncture if you're so restricted on herbs, right? I mean, you've got to do something. So I strongly believe that certain, like especially with combined diseases, right? Taiyang Yangming combined, Taiyang Shaoyang combined, Yangming Shaoyang combined, all of those combined diseases. And the combined diseases from the basic seminar that we did, the basic patterns and pathophysiology seminar, right? Then if you were to look at what are the symptoms mentioned in those lines for those diseases, combined diseases, what are the locations of those symptoms, where most of those symptoms play out, and you then look at the location of the channels, where the channels run, you would probably see that the symptoms occur at areas that are close to both channels at the same time. Right? Taiyang Yangming, right? For stiff neck and nape, right? For example, you're thinking like hand Yangming shoulder points, as well as hand Taiyang shoulder points, right? Shoulder and shoulder blade area, right? That's why Gugentang treats that area, for example, right? And so forth and so forth. So you could actually start looking at where the symptoms are and what the channels are that run in that region, and kind of see a correlation between the combined diseases, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. I'm a big fan of threading needling. I don't know why per se. I just always liked doing that. So if you can, if you have Shaoyang Yangming combined disease, I was always a big fan of doing, like a stomach 36 to gallbladder 34 or something like that, or like combining linking points, right? Linking points. I always liked, DLI4 to PC8 and those kind of things. Like I like that. I mean, it makes for a very strong treatment, but then I like that too. So that's another way of treating combined diseases, when you link points, right? If, for example, you're using a Xiao Cai Hu Tang, but you're using it for a heat entering the blood chamber, and in your Xiao Cai, which means a lot of mental emotional changes, right? Mania and so forth. And in your Xiao Cai Hu Tang protocol, you have a triple burner 5, then what's to stop you from through needling to PC6? Link it up, right? Because the pericardium is definitely the one in charge of the emotional aspect. You know what I mean? So there's many ways to kind of creatively kind of work with that. And I think it's all fine as long as you have a congruent theory behind it that guides your activity, right? Second consideration is going to be, also one of the thing about channels and location is that the whole theory about that cold enters the foot channels first, right? So when you're looking at chapter 31 of the Su Wen, the treatise on fever, right, then basically it tells you, well, it doesn't tell you clearly, but this is how commentators, including myself, interpret it, is that the cold, contraction, stagnation symptoms seem to play out on the foot channel, while the fever seems to play out as a dysfunction of the hand channel. Right? So the fever is always a response to the cold constriction, right? So Taiyang, first the cold closes, boom, and then the fever, boom. The blood heats up and the fever comes, right? Yang-Ming constriction happens first on the Yang-Ming foot channel, but then boom, the fever is all Yang-Ming large intestine. Dryness comes in the nose, redness in the face, all of that, right? So slowly, they both become involved. So it starts on the foot channel, and then it goes onto the hand channel with more excess, right? So that seems to be the case. So then, also there, when you're treating Taiyang disease, make sure you do hand and foot channels, right? Yang-Ming disease, make sure you do hand and foot channels. Now, of course, if it's more constipation, let's say Yang-Ming constipation, you might do more foot channel, right? Stomach 25, stomach 37, whatever, you do more foot channel stuff, right? But if it's more, let's say, fever and heat and all the yang rushing out through the face, then you might be focusing more on, I don't know, Li11, Li4, like more hand channel stuff, right? Maybe even Li20 if the nose is very congested with Guggen, for example. You know what I mean? So you focus a bit, you can kind of balance it out depending on where more of your symptomology is playing out. But you can't treat Taiyang without, for example, and by only needling the Taiyang small intestine and not needling the foot channel. That wouldn't make sense, right? You wouldn't be drawing yang to that foot channel. Biaobenzongqi, one of the ways of including Biaobenzongqi theory that I personally like a lot is guest-host combinations, which is what we call yuan and luo combinations, right? You choose the yuan point on one channel and the luo point on its counterpart, right? So for example, you would do, let's say, the yuan point on the bladder channel in Taiyang disease and the luo point on the kidney channel, right? So you do a bladder 62 with a kidney 4 combo, right? So that would be harmonizing interior exterior. That will you be treating the exterior conformation, the Taiyang conformation, as the main one, but you also make sure that you bring the body's attention to keeping a good supply of Shaoyin fire into that water through the luo point on its interior counterpart, right? So for me, that is one of the ways of kind of embodying, with your needles embodying Biaobenzongqi, right? Because you have the external conformation and it's always kept healthy because of its interior counterpart, right? So the interior counterpart is the one that ultimately makes sure and ensures the health of the exterior equivalent, right? So that's kind of that perspective, I think, guest-host combination. Kaiheshu is going to be more related to the technique that you'll use, right? Like I mentioned before, if you tonify a point and on a conformation, and if it's, for example, a conformation that pivots, you will tonify the pivoting, which in Shaoyin, and this is a good example, in Shaoyin disease, if you tonify a point on the Shaoyin channel, what would that mean? What would that do? Let's say you tonify kidney 3. What does that do in the body? Think opening, closing, pivoting. Not all at once. It promotes Shaoyin, kidney 3. It promotes pivoting of Shaoyin. And what does pivoting of Shaoyin mean?
Yang circulates or yang rises?
Pardon?
Going into a yang confirmation.
Wow. I'm a little shocked here. So Shaoyin pivots means that the pivot is the birth of something from its opposite. So the yin pivot means the birth of yin from yang. So when you promote the pivoting of Shaoyin, you're promoting the birth of yin. Crazy, huh? Right? So if anything, if you have too much yin, like Shaoyin disease, that is extinguishing your yang, you need to reduce the pivoting of Shaoyin. Because Shaoyin is pivoting too much, and because Shaoyin is pivoting too much, it is creating a Taiyin opening too soon, too fast. That's why Shaoyin disease, lack of yang, always leads to diarrhea, too much yin. Right? And that's what Fuzi does. Fuzi reduces the birth of yin. because it's the intense accumulation and growth of yin too fast, too soon, that is completely killing off your yang, right? So it's very important. So it's kind of counterintuitive, really, but I think it brings our attention to the seriousness of acupuncture technique and the danger that acupuncture poses on a very, very subtle level, thank God, because otherwise we would already long be out of a job, right? Like I said before, Chinese medicine is probably the most forgiving medical system ever, because considering how little we know about what we do, we're doing quite well, right? We're being quite safe. It's an extremely safe, balanced, forgiving system. You know, if surgery required that same amount of margin of error, wow. You know, it would be a lot of botched surgeries out there, which might actually be the case anyway.
So if you have too much yin and the resulting diarrhea,
Mhm.
then the fix for that is promoting birth of yang.
Correct. Correct. Bringing yang back. Because the yang is the one that's getting killed off by all the yin that is now accumulating, right? So you have to stop the accumulation of yin, not by getting rid of yin, but by bringing yang back. Just bringing sexy back. And so you bring the yang back, the proliferation and the accumulation of yin stops, and then you balance out yin and yang again. Right, so that's the goal. Same thing, reduction of a point, right? If you reduce a point that is an opening point, you reduce the opening, you reduce the closing, you reduce the pivoting, right? So same thing. So you could, for example, say the following. Let's say we're using let's say you want to use, trying to think, lung 5 in a Tiao Wei Chen Qi Tang scenario. I don't even know if that's part of the protocol. That doesn't even matter. It's not about what points. It's about the idea behind it. Tiao Wei Chen Qi Tang is basically a yin tonic. We talked about that. It eliminates the dryness to give birth to moisture, right, in Yang Ming. Yang Ming disease, I'm allowed to treat Tai Yin, right, because that's, of course, the Zhong Qi principle. So when I needle, when I have mild dry stool with maybe mild constipation of Yang Ming, and I'm needling lung 5 water point of the lung Tai Yin in that context, knowing opening, closing, pivoting, what technique should I use on lung 5? What's the opening, closing, pivoting of Tai Yin? Tai Yin is an opener, right? If I have Yang Ming, and it's opening towards the bottom, right? Tai Yin opens towards the bottom, so for the Yin to flow down. So if I have Yang Ming disease and I want to give birth to more water, I need to tonify lung 5. Tonify lung 5 so that it opens and that the moisture can be born and flow down and moisten the interior. Right, so from those perspectives, I think it's very important that we think of those perspectives. Like I said, I haven't subjected that to enough clinical use myself, just maybe a few years, not enough, but still important to think of. 5-phase control cycle, same thing. I mean, ultimately, five-phase control cycle is going to be by using the transport points, right? Is that, no, what do we call those points? The wood point, the earth point, the whatever, those kind of points, right? Yeah, shoe points or whatever, yeah. Blue suede shoe. And then you can kind of put that elemental quality, kind of like we have with the flavors in the 25 flavors of the Tang Yi Jing, right? It's kind of mutual containment of the elements. You've got a wood of wood, you've got a fire of wood, you've got a metal of wood, and those kinds of things. Now, I don't want to like mechanically now. Sometimes, for some herbs, I do have in my mind some type of correlation. And some of them are really easy to spot. For example, what's the water point on the earth spleen channel? Spleen 9, right? Spleen 9. So your Yinling trend or your spleen 9 is your Fuling. right? That's nice. That's nice. But every formula that has Guija in it would require you to use liver 1. And that is not so nice. You know what I mean? It's like, so there's certain limitations. And I mean, it wouldn't be a problem. Like if I don't care, then of course it's not my liver 1 that gets needled. Like I don't care. But but I don't like using the points on like just like the last point on a channel, the first point on a channel. I don't like those because they're painful, and I go for the chi, so I want a bit more of a fatter muscle that I'm sticking a needle in, because in those very skinny, hard, dense areas, you get no de chi, you get the pain, but no no de chi. So I don't like that very much, right? But strictly speaking, you could kind of translate like that. But if you translate that, it's maybe a bit too linear, right? So I kind of want an overall quality. Also, the thing is that you're using Guija to build more fire. You're not just using Guija as a pure dispersant, right? You're using Guija to fan the wind so that you can build more fire. Oh yeah, it's the pungent herb of the pungent class. Yeah, but we're using it actually a lot more for fanning the wind, to stir the flame, so then we can warm up the blood, right? So then if you want to use like a wood point on a Taiyang channel, for example, in Taiyang disease, I could see how that would work. I don't know what the wood point on the bladder is, but I could see how that could be a possibility. What's the wood point on the bladder? Pardon? 40? No. Which one? I'm glad I'm not the only one who doesn't know. Let me put it that way. You know, I'm glad I'm not the only one. I always feel very insecure about my acupuncture knowledge, but.
Well, that's only one bit of it, though, right? There's a whole lot of other.
Yeah, yeah. Just like in herbal medicine, right? There's the 25 of the Tang Jing is just only one bit of it, right? And it's a guiding principle, but it's not the only herbs that we're going to use. We're going to use 360 herbs, not just 25, right? So yeah, same thing. So, but it's one of the considerations that you can keep in mind as you are going through your process of point selection, right? And it gives you multiple dimensions, as opposed to just choosing a point. I use this point because it treats headache. I use that point because it treats toe ache. I use this point because it treats ear ache. You know what I mean? Like, which is also fine, and that also exists in the herbal system. But that's all part of the Jingui. That's what we call specialty herbs, right? I use this herb because it stops bleeding, and I don't use it for anything else except for bleeding. Just like that, and that exists also. So you could say, I use this point because it stops bleeding, right? Like in the Wumei one, you know, there's these points. What are they? Like the Yang Ming points on the face that treat roundworms and treat parasites. Okay, right? I mean, there's obviously Yang Ming treatment because there's this very prominent dosage of Huanglian in your Wumei one. So I guess it's okay to needle a Yang Ming point, especially if that's the main point mentioned for any type of parasitic infestation. Fine. Incorporate it if you want. I mean, there's a rationale that you could make a case for it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of what where I'm going from. There's like all these different ways of looking at it to help you select your points. Meeting points, influential points, same thing, right? Influential points. If I'm using Sunisan, which has Baishao in it, right? And Baishao decontracts spasms of fascia and tendons and things like that, then and also Sunisan regulates the wood-earth imbalance, the gallbladder young wood with the earth imbalance, then why not use gallbladder 34? Because it's the wood point, it's the earth point on the young wood channel, and is the influential point for tendons, which is very good for spasms and contractions, and like I said, IT band and whatever, you know, abdominal ligament, urgency and contraction of those things. You know, why not? Right? You know, keep all those things in mind, right? Front mu, back shu kind of correlation also, right? You can use, sometimes you use front mu points, sometimes you use back shu points, right? Yeah, if you have, let's say you have Taiyang disease, Ma Huang Tang pattern, but the patient's symptoms are intense lower back pain, well, choose the bladder back shu point, for example. Why not? It's a Taiyang point, and it's got a Taiyang bladder relationship, and it's on your back. Why not? You know, you use all those things into consider. Take all those things into consideration. Same thing with the front mu points, right? You're treating you're treating Shaoyin disease, which is the fire between the kidneys, which is the imperial fire of the small intestine. And you'll see in my point protocols, there's always a CV4 involved, right? Again, you should better off with more moxa for those things, but still, if you do a needle or you do the moxa on the needle or something like that, that's fine too, right? So it's all part of the consideration. Point location, personally, I feel you should always combine local and distal. You know, I do think that it's a nice thing to combine local points and distal points, right? Like I like, for example, what would be a good example? Like a SI3 bladder 62, right? I mean, I know that in later schools of thought that was called like a Dumai combination. You know, whatever you want to call it, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. It is indeed Taiyang, and Taiyang is of course the greatest yang, and Dumai is said to be the thing that kind of gathers all the yang and controls all the yang and stuff like that. That's fine, right? But it is addressing both hand Taiyang and foot Taiyang, right? It's both working well for your neck, but also for your back. It's, you know, it's kind of the whole Taiyang conformation, hand, foot together is being addressed, right? So all of those things are good considerations, right? Points where channels intersect, points where multiple channels run through, right? I'm a big fan of using those kind of extraordinary vessel combinations, right? Yang Wei, Yin Wei, Yang Chao, Yin Chao, those kinds of, because basically by having a conformation is always bigger than just a channel. A conformation involves multiple channels. It involves the functioning of multiple channels. It involves multiple organs, right? So by using an extraordinary vessel, a lot of the extraordinary vessels, the points on the extraordinary vessels tend to be points of different channels, right? You can have Shaoyang points on the Yang Cha Mai. You have Yang Ming points on the Yang Cha Mai. You have Taiyang points on the Yang Cha Mai, right? So they have multiple channels involved. So basically by using a Yang Cha Mai treatment, you're actually hitting all the Yang conformations, right? So let's say you have a triple Yang disease, then you want to use points where all three Yang, where you have all three Yang channels come together, right? So you want to look for those points, because I think then it's the principle of minimal intervention, right? You're still just sticking one needle, but you're sticking it in a point where multiple conformations can be talked to at the same time, rather than you having to go talk to them in 3 different locations, right? So it still kind of uses the minimal intervention principle, right? And then of course specific point actions. If a certain point has a certain function and it works really well, and that's the function that you need, based on your basic treatment that you've done to rectify the overall physiology of a conformation of a channel, then you combine a certain extra point, kind of like a modifying herb, right? Oh, because that herb is really good for that. So on top of my base formula, I'm going to incorporate it. No problem. Right, so that's also fine. So those are all some types of the considerations, and there might be more considerations. Like I said, my acupuncture knowledge is fairly limited. There might be more considerations in here that you can use. Let's take a little break now, and we'll continue with some points.